Okay, welcome back, grade 11s. Welcome back. This week we're making pie crust, and we're going to be using two different types of fats. We're going to be using lard, my favorite over shortening. It's a bit healthier of a fat, where shortening is a trans fat. Google it. Lard is healthier for you. And some butter, so we have the best of both worlds. I have some salted butter here, so the recipe that's linked below will actually call for unsalted, but so if you only have salted, you can leave out the salt. We're going to be using a 9-inch round pie pan. If you don't have a pie pan at home, you can also play around with making little tarts. If you have a muffin tin, right? Maybe I'll try to link something below for that. We're going to be using pastry flour, and the difference between that and all-purpose flour is pastry flour has a little less gluten in it, so it won't shrink as much and it won't be as tough. Pastry flour makes for a more tender dough because it has less gluten. Okay? It will make it fragile when rolling it out, so you've got to be really careful, but we're going to roll our crust or our dough around our rolling pin and gently lay it into our pie pan. So that's pastry flour. You can definitely play around with all-purpose flour too, but you might have just a little bit more shrinkage and a bit chewier of a crust. Inside of my pie crust, I'm going to put bananas and pudding, which you could make from scratch too, of course, and some whipped cream. So we're going to have a banana cream pie. Wouldn't you know? All right, let's start with the basics, the pie crust itself. A little tricky sometimes, but don't be intimidated. It's fairly similar to making biscuits because you start with your dry ingredients and you're going to cut in your fat to your dry ingredients using a pastry cutter, or if you don't have one at home, you can use knives or a fork or even your fingers. Right? So the two main ingredients that we're going to use is a pastry flour. We're not going to use the salt because my butter has some salt in it. We're going to use the fats, okay, and cut those into the dry ingredients. Okay, so lard and butter, salted butter, and then we're going to use some ice cold water. We want to use cold water as to not melt the fat. That's why it calls for cold water. And we are going to mix that all together, and we're going to leave some clumps of fat, just like we do for our biscuits, to have some flakiness. So what happens with pieces of fat throughout your pastry dough, they will melt first in the oven when your crust bakes, and they'll separate the dough a little bit and you'll get a flaky crust. Okay, so those are our main ingredients, and we are going to bake our crust naked in the pan. Because the filling doesn't get cooked, we're going to just put the raw crust in here, weigh it down a little bit, and bake it on its own, and then take it out, cool it, and put our pudding and filling inside. Sweet intermission dance. All right, first step's really easy. Just start with our 2.5 cups of pastry flour or all-purpose flour. I'm using pastry. You can sift it too if you want to. And we're going to cut in our lard and butter. If you want to help, if your butter's still a little cold or stiff, you can cut it up into little cubes, and that will help the process of cutting it in. Lard's fairly soft, so I'm not going to cut it. I'm going to pop that in there, and I'm going to blend it in until it has little pieces. So I don't have a pastry cutter here at home, but I can use a fork, and I'm just going to blend this in. And I actually probably will switch to my hands too. If you've got clean hands, they're the best tools. So I'm really just going to blend in the fat until I've got pea-sized pieces running throughout the dough. And then I'm going to add my ice cold water. It says 1/2 cup of cold water, but start with a couple of tablespoons at a time until your dough holds together into a ball. Not too dry and not too wet. And then you're going to refrigerate your dough for 1/2 hour in the freezer or 2 hours in the fridge. All right. That's what our dough looks like right now. I don't want to completely blend in all of the fat. I want to, look at my hands, Cookie Monster hands. That's okay. We're gonna mix in the cold water now to form the dough, and then we can clean off our hands. Okay, we're back. I ended up using most of the cold water. This is our dough. I think it makes 2 crusts. I'm gonna cut it in half, form it into patties to let it chill, because when I take it out, I don't want to have to work with a round ball. I want it to already be kind of ready for me to start rolling out. So when you go to chill your crust, put them into patty shapes. Don't taper them down on the sides, but make them more of a hockey puck shape, but a bit wider, perhaps about 3 inches wide. Okay, so this is what your dough looks like. Don't want to blend too much because we want little pieces of fat. You want to be able to see the marbling of the fat throughout the dough, because that's going to create your flaky crust. All right, like so. I like to just rotate the dough and kind of flatten it around the edge. 1 crust, about 1 inch thick, 3 inches wide. Do that with both. Wrap them up in plastic wrap or in a damp cloth and pop them in the fridge or freezer. Got my crust out of the freezer. Now you might need to let it sit for a minute or even microwave it in 5-10 second increments. But don't soften it too much. Mine, I think, is going to work, a good consistency. You want to be able to press on it a little bit. Got my pie pan, got my oven preheated to 425. I'll put a recipe below, but most pie shells bake at 425 for the first 10 or 15 minutes. And this melts the butter or the fat and helps the crust separate for a flaky crust. And then you turn the oven down to about 350, 375 for the remainder of the baking time. All right, until you've got a light golden color. When you are baking a pie shell naked or empty, it's called, you often use pie weights. Those are just ceramic or clay weights. Sometimes you can use dry beans as well to weigh down your pie crust so it doesn't shrink. Also, what helps keep the crust from shrinking is fluting the crust around the edge of the pan or pressing it to the pan. Fluting is a decorative design that you can do with your fingers or with a fork, and that helps press the crust to the pan. It also helps seal 2 crusts together if you're doing a double crust pie. This is just a single crust pie because it's going to be a banana cream pie. Okay, I don't have any pie weights here, did not pack those during the quarantine, okay, but I can also put a empty other pie pan inside of this, like kind of sitting on top of the raw dough or in between or on top of some parchment. Or I can just kind of chance it. We'll see how it turns out. I can press it really well to the edges of the pan. So I'm going to lightly flour my counter. Okay. Get my crust here. My rolling pin, I'm also going to flour. And give it a test, see how stiff your dough is. You might need to warm it up a little bit in your hands even. Your hands are great to warm things up. I guess to transfer some heat. Okay. We are going to roll this out to about 1 inch wider than the pan on either side. So about 2 inches wider in total, at least for diameter. Okay. So we can test the size by just turning our pan upside down after it's been rolling out. And we want to keep a round shape when we're rolling to fit into our pie shell. So roll one way and then roll the other, and you don't have to use a lot of force. So the warmth in my hands is softening this up a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to start rolling that. Okay, so I'm rolling out my crust one way, then the other, trying to keep a round shape. And once I've started to get a bit larger, I can take my pan, test the size of it. I'm going to go a little bit thinner. Okay. Then I'm going to take my crust and still with some flour, I'm going to roll it up around the rolling pin. Okay, that's going to just make it really easy to transport. Get my pie pan and gently roll it out into the pan. Easy peasy. There you go. Then I'm going to lift up the sides to kind of let the crust fall into the sides of the pan. Okay, and then you can go in and flute and then cut off your excess. Score with your fork a few times and you're ready to go. Oven's on at 425. First 10 minutes, turn it down to 350 until you've got a light golden brown color. Flute it around the edge, and folks, I'm by no means a pie expert. It's not my specialty, but I'm just sawing kind of up and down sort of motion to cut off the extra crust, and then you can kind of tidy things up if you need to. Press securely to the pan so it doesn't shrink so much or move on you. Take your fork, a few score marks around the edge too, and you're ready to go. Again, sometimes you can put parchment and some pie weights in there or some dry beans for baking. I'm going to see how we go without. Okay, there's our crust at 425. It has only another minute, and then I'm going to turn it down. I'm not going to remove it up from the oven after I've turned it down. Okay, it's not beautiful, but there it is. It's going to cool down, and then we can put in our cooled cooked pudding or fill it with fruit. I'm going to do the vanilla pudding and then the banana and whipped cream. I'm back, and let's finish off this pie. So I took my crust out, baked it naked, or empty. I let it cool. I made my vanilla pudding on the stovetop. Very easy to make from scratch too, but I cheated a little bit. Let that set up, so it's very set up. So that's cooked vanilla pudding, not your instant. Instant won't work. And now all I have left to do is cut up all my bananas. I'm going to do a nice rondelle slice of, lots of bananas, maybe 3 on there, and I'm going to whip up my whipping cream. And a trick that my grandmother taught me, and I always use still, is to chill my bowl and my beaters in the freezer before whipping my whipped cream, because that will help get the whipped cream to be nice and stiff. So chill your beaters, your bowl, metal bowl or glass bowl, in the freezer beforehand. Works really great. To my whipping cream, I'm going to use, so this is heavy cream, this is 35%. I'm going to use icing sugar or confectionery sugar or fine, just fine granulated sugar, and maybe some vanilla. And you could put a couple slices of banana on top. I'll whip this up, come back and show you the finished product. My bananas rondelled, remember, sliced in a circle. I'm gonna lay them all out. You could just pile them on too, okay? However many bananas you like. And we've got our whipped cream, beaten stiff, okay? So once we got our bananas on there, we're gonna plop all our whipped cream on there. Delicious. All right, there we go. Banana cream pie. Delicious. You could put toasted coconut on top too if you like, or your little sprinkle of cinnamon. Delicious. Share it with a friend. Store this in the fridge after you make it. Keep for a couple days, but your bananas will eventually start to brown. Enjoy. What is that on your face?